afternoon. It's good to be here with you today. It is my honor to introduce our distinguished speaker, Ryan Buchanan, the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia. As the chief federal law enforcement official in the Northern District, Ryan serves over 7 million people through his oversight of the investigation and litigation of all criminal and civil cases brought on behalf of the U.S. Leading a team of approximately 250 prosecutors, civil litigators, and support personnel, his office is dedicated to enforcing federal criminal laws, advocating for crime victims, and representing U.S. interests in federal court. He and his team, several of whom are with us today, investigate and prosecute domestic and international terrorism, organized crime, gang violence, public corruption, cybercrime, narcotics trafficking, civil rights violations, whistleblower actions, and financial and healthcare fraud allegations. Recent headlines include fentanyl dealer sentenced to nearly 20 years, exporter sentenced to prison for shipping heavy equipment to Iran, doctor sentenced in a dark web murder plot, former accountant sentenced to 2 years in prison, indictment of men charged with armed robberies of postal workers, an IT man sentenced to prison for filing false tax returns, 11 men sentenced for drug trafficking. A former global diversity executive at Facebook pled guilty to defrauding Facebook out of $4 million. Sex trafficking, child pornography, food stamp fraud, fuel tax credit fraud, embezzlement, customs fraud, unemployment fraud, firearms trafficking, kickbacks, gang violence, charges against a man who threatened U.S. Rep. Marjorie Taylor Greene, and drug trafficking through butter, just to name a few. So prior to taking on the U.S. Attorney role in the Biden administration, Ryan served as an AUSA, an experience that really gave him, and has served him well in his position as U.S. Attorney for the Northern District. Needless to say, I rest better at night knowing that Ryan and his team at the U.S. Attorney's Office are playing their part in the law enforcement apparatus to hold criminals accountable and keep us all safe. Please join me in welcoming our U.S. Attorney for the Northern District, Ryan Buchanan. So I hope all of you feel safer knowing about the various things that our U.S. Attorney and his great staff. In fact, would you all stand, the people from Ryan's office who are with us today? Thank you for your service. Really appreciate it. And I know we have Charlie Peeler, who's a former U.S. Attorney in the audience as well. We're expecting you to hit Ryan up with some really good questions. So let me start with an easy one to give us some sense of your background and what took you to the role you're in today. What inspired you to pursue law and then leave private practice to go into prosecutorial public service?
First, Sham, thank you for having me, and thank you for that warm introduction. It makes it sound like I do work, and my team, these are the folks who really do all the work, but I'm happy to talk about it because it is really excellent work that keeps us safe. I am from, as you can hear in how I speak, a small town in rural Alabama. I'm not from Atlanta. Came here to work for a law firm, but I graduated from law school and headed over to a law firm without any idea of what a federal prosecutor does. I was clerking for a federal judge and sitting in court and in chambers and saw these lawyers coming through, and I was immediately smitten. And I thought that's what I want to do at some point in my career. And so I went on, worked at McGuire Woods, a large international law firm, for a number of years, with the idea and the goal that at some point I would make my way back to the department. I was fortunate to do so in Birmingham, the U.S. Attorney's Office there in 2010, and almost 14 years later, I've never had a bad day working for DOJ.
Was there a case you came across early in your career that you can recall that just helped flip the switch?
So there are a couple, and they're in sort of a weird space. I was a national security prosecutor for years and coordinated that program for us. And prosecutors, we love to prosecute cases. We love to litigate. We love to be in court, but in the national security space, the goal is for something to not happen. It's in prevention. And so I worked on a case early here, some militia folks up in North Georgia who wanted to start the boogaloo, which is a term we have come to understand, but they wanted to start sort of the end of days. And when that sting operation ended and nothing had happened, but we had a case to prosecute, I felt extremely accomplished, and I felt that sort of being in this space that prevented people from suffering injury was a worthwhile space.
So, when you think about, John mentioned it earlier, one of the themes this year is lessons in leadership. What are 2 to 3 leadership lessons that have guided your legal career?
There's one, to borrow a bit of a phrase from a younger generation, sort of understanding the assignment. I came into my role, my office, in January of 2021. We had 3 U.S. attorneys. Our current U.S. attorney, our then U.S. attorney, resigned before we expected him to. We then had the U.S. attorney from the Southern District of Georgia over in Savannah in Augusta come over to be our U.S. attorney for a little bit. And then by the end of the month, he was gone, and our first assistant was the U.S. attorney. And so understanding what the office needed with all of that turmoil, we were in most newspapers across the country, and we had a moment that was in the paper here where a call was leaked, an office call was leaked to the press, and to me that really underscored sort of a lack of trust in leadership that we had. And so I walked into this role understanding that I needed to take care of the folks in the office. I needed to rebuild that trust sort of locally, and then understanding the assignment from a big picture space. And that is that the Attorney General often tells us that our goals, or our job is to uphold the rule of law, to protect the public safety, and then to protect civil rights. And in telling this story about the department's founding, the department was founded 1870, as we know it now, in 1870, and one of its first goals was to protect the civil rights of recently freed folks who had gained some brand new rights in the Constitution in the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. And so I know from my personal history that my family were those folks in South Georgia and South Alabama who needed that protection. The AG talks about it in terms of his family, his grandparents who fled Eastern Russia and anti-Semitism and religious persecution. And so he's had that frame of reference for him and for the department. And in sort of understanding my role, it's important for me to understand how I fit in that. And it just so happens that historically, that's a set of ideals that I can really align with, because that's a set of ideals that afforded my family some protection and ultimately afforded me this opportunity.
So earlier during lunch, Jennifer, you were talking about what folks do in the office, and you said white collar crime came up, and she said, "I hope this is the last time I meet you, or the only time I ever meet you." And in all seriousness, though, it does. There's significant authority and weight that comes along with the job for you as well as everyone on your team. And so one of the questions in the four-way Rotary test, or Rotary four-way test, is it the truth? Given that responsibility and that authority, having the resources of the FBI and other law enforcement agencies, can you talk about your approach to find the truth on behalf of the people you represent and the Constitution that you defend?
Well, I hope that as we leave, and the folks at this table who are a menacing bunch, I hope that we all understand that the feds are not, we're not all mean people. We're quite nice, I believe. And if we work together in a spirit of crime prevention, then those interactions are far less intimidating than people typically report them to be. But our job is to seek the truth. In the cases that we prosecute, the investigations that we lead, and so that is, it is a guiding principle in how we do stuff. And if we have the great fortune that our only sort of requirement is to do the right thing, we add to it and say we do the right thing the right way and for the right reasons. But otherwise, there's not a consequence for us looking through a case and deciding this is something that does not need to be prosecuted. Or if we work a case and we recommend a sentence that's not the statutory max. There's nothing bad from that. That exercise of judgment and discretion is not only valued, but it's really encouraged. And so the truth is really our only goal. And I think that I try to communicate that to the team, the folks at the department, communicate it out to the U.S. Attorney's offices, and we know that if we're in that vein, if we're seeking truth, if we're doing our work in a way that the members of our community can be proud of, and they understand why we're doing it, they understand that we'll do it in the best way that we can, I feel like we can have the impact that we're looking for in keeping people safe.
Actually, I can, in 2018, at Blue Links, we had recently bought a company out of the Midwest, and there was a former employee who left, but he left with some keys to the kingdom on the IT systems. And 2 or 3 months after he was gone, he shut us down, and we had forensic people going. It was like one of those movies where you're going back and forth, and these guys who are hacking each other and fighting each other, and we're watching it in real time. Anyway, you fast forward, we did all this work. We had all the evidence we needed, worked with the FBI, worked with your office, your team at the U.S. Attorney's Office. BJ Pack was in the seat, and it was an incredibly collaborative, constructive, productive experience between we as a company and the U.S. Attorney's Office, and it definitely gave me a great sense of pride. And the people at Blue Links were just thrilled that we could hold this person accountable. And he ultimately went to prison thanks to the good work of your office and your teammates here. So hats off to y'all, and I really do mean that. It was amazing. So what does the rule of law mean to you?
How about an easy one? The rule of law, I described it in closing arguments to juries, that the law, it really is that thing that binds us together as a civil society. There have to be, unfortunately, some guardrails on behavior. And the rule of law is just that. And so long as we can find ways to encourage may include prosecution, folks who get outside of those bounds will do so. But it is a necessary component to our society. It's what keeps us safe. It's what keeps us from some of our worst instincts. But it is an evolving concept. It moves. We have better understanding as time goes on. But while we have a functioning society that operates within the bounds that the law sets forth, we can have a society that affords opportunity, that advances safety, and in which everyone's civil rights are really protected.
So that's a good segue into the next question. And so, what are the Justice Department's guiding principles and priorities, and how do you balance the community's expectations with those of the administration, your office, given that you only have so many resources to deploy to any given initiative or in support of the administration's agenda? And on top of that, just sort of touch on that prosecutorial discretion, which I think a lot of folks are thinking about these days.
So one thing that I'm really proud of and that I enjoy, and I believe my colleagues enjoy as well, this district, the Northern District of Georgia, 46 counties from down by LaGrange all the way up to our northern borders, is really a slice of America right now. We have a large urban center, the world's busiest and safest airport, We have changing suburbs that are dynamic and diverse. And then we have a large swath of rural Georgia that reminds me of my home in Northwest Alabama. And so with that great diversity comes a lot of opportunities for us. We have, not to say opportunities, not to say we have every problem imaginable, but we have the problems and the opportunities that are prevalent across the country. We are a transportation hub, and so we have fentanyl trafficking and human trafficking here. We have a booming fintech industry, and so we're cyber targets here in town. We have some violent crime. We have all types of, we've got 33 or so Fortune 500 companies, so there's fraud opportunities here as well. And so when you have all of that, we can't necessarily negate, our efforts at one for the other. It really does, encourage us to be as sort of specific as we can possibly be. And so we've dedicated resources to fighting fentanyl. We're working closely with our law enforcement partners locally to combat violent crime. We are in the last week of Human Trafficking Prevention Month, so that's always a focus for us. And then fraud and cyber and other financial crimes keep us just as busy. And so we work from a threat sort of guidepost. The things that are most problematic for us sort of get the most attention. And unfortunately, this administration gives us a lot of latitude to spend our resources that way. And so the ideas that come from Washington really do align with the things that are necessary and needed here in the Northern District.
Yeah, can you talk about your community engagement and how you and your office are fully aware of what our citizens are looking for from your office?
Sure, and that's really important. I mentioned earlier that we enjoy prosecuting cases, but we are happy to have less work. And so we engage our community stakeholders as much as we can in order to prevent crime. And so we have worked in every aspect. We've worked with our youth on crime prevention with local district attorneys. We have an elder fraud task force that works with individuals who are unfortunately targets of cybercrime and fraud. We've had a houses of worship training to make certain that our faith leaders know the best safety aspects for the house of worship. And we've done the same for schools because we want to be on the front side of when crime occurs, because it's not worth, the next great case is not worth the injury that individuals and communities sustain when widespread sort of crime occurs. So we have been very, very active in all of those aspects.
So, the community engagement I think is fantastic, and just from when we think about all of our public servants out there, recently we've seen a number of our public servants hire security details. We've got social media that's playing a role as well. How do you think about, does, in terms of what keeps you up at night, in terms of your own safety, your staff safety, the folks who are really on the front lines of keeping the rest of us safe, does that ever cross your mind? Do you think about it? Are you at all worried?
I'm not worried about my safety. I've spent sort of 4 or 5 years working on a large gang case and a RICO case, and if that comes away easy, then there's not much else to be afraid of. I do worry about my staff and my team, their safety. We've seen an unprecedented number of attacks and threats toward law enforcement partners, elected officials, election workers. We've charged a case where a man in Texas threatened some election workers here. And we've also charged a man from Alabama for threatening district attorney and the sheriff here. And so we have dealt with that. It is not pleasant because to know the folks that I work with, to know a dedicated and talented group public servants who really just want to do their jobs. And so they don't deserve the threats, and when they do pop up, we will prosecute them as best we can. As for what keeps me awake or what worries me, there are some places in our country that have become synonymous with tragedy, and just they're on a single name sort of basis. Parkland, Uvalde, Newtown, San Bernardino, Tree of Life, Columbine, sort of not having a place within the Northern District of Georgia become one of those things, that targeted mass violence that we've seen, and just sort of naming through those couple, Parkland, Columbine, or schools, San Bernardino was a workplace, Pulse nightclub, a social place, Tree of Life and Mother Emanuel, houses of worship. It's everywhere. And so the idea that there's something afoot that would sort of visit this great sense of tragedy that spans generations, and it impacts and influences a place for years. That idea is the one that bothers me, because that's the one thing that we might not be able to understand before it's happened. And so I know that my folks, we work diligently as best we can to run down any leads and information about it, because that is that thing that I think really does impact communities.
I think that's a nice segue or a way to connect some of the dots here. You talked about community engagement, talked about getting information and kind of the see something, say something, right? How best can we as business leaders help you and your office and your team in the work that you're doing on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I think you touched on it when you talked about the experience that your company had and sort of reaching out to FBI and working with them and working with my office. But engaging is a big thing. I told someone earlier that one of my favorite things to do as part of this job is to sort of demystify federal prosecutors, hopefully put a smiling face with it, so that people understand that we are in the business of stopping things before they happen. And we can only do so really if we know about it. And so I would encourage you to engage with us as best you can. But that engagement also means sort of engaging with those who are around you. I talked about that parade of horribles from those mass shooting incidents. We have an alarming statistic sort of comes with that, and that's in 80% or so of those events, after the fact, someone says, I knew something wasn't right. I saw this, I saw that, and I didn't do anything about it. And there's a lot of remorse that comes there. And so I would encourage you, it doesn't mean call the FBI every time. It may be what it is. But when there's something concerning, have a conversation, maybe with that person. Ask them if they're doing okay. Our first goal, we uphold the rule of law, but advancing the public safety can be as easy as having a conversation with someone who's in a space where they need a human touch. They need someone to ask them how they're doing, and that may be the thing that sort of pushes them away from something that would add Northern Georgia to that list. That same goes, I told Sham I was going to make a pitch about fentanyl. Last year, more people died from drug overdoses and drug poisonings in the United States than any other year. And the previous record was set in 2022. And so drugs and the way that we think of them has to change. There was a time I was thinking earlier about the commercial, this is your brain and this is your brain on drugs. And that sort of hints at battling and preventing addiction, which is a worthwhile endeavor. But now we're seeing an increase in the lethality of drugs. And so it doesn't take addiction for a life to be taken or to be ruined. And I make this pitch when I talk to sort of what we would consider at-risk youth, but also make it when I talk to law students. And inevitably, if I ask a group of law students who knows where they can get pills, they'll kind of look around, and then eventually the hands kind of creep up. I read an example the other day of a neuroscience student at Ohio State who thought they were buying Adderall and bought fentanyl and died. College students at the University of North Carolina. It's not this idea that it's a party scenario. Some of our best and brightest students are using study aids and these other drugs, and if they resort to buying them from the internet, there's a chance that it may be laced with fentanyl. So I would encourage you, I know that the folks in this room have some high-achieving young people in their lives, to check in on them and to make certain that they know that if they buy drugs, whether or not it's a pill for studying or partying, if they buy drugs from a place that's not a medical provider, there's a chance that they're buying fentanyl and that they will die. So that's another way that you can help, is by touching up on the young folks in your lives to make sure that they understand the dangers of pills.
Thank you, Ryan. I think we're, before we get to Q&A, I do have one lighthearted question for you. So, married, you have 2 girls?
I am married to a lawyer, and I have 2 girls. My oldest turned 13 Friday, so I'm a parent of a teenager and a 10-year-old.
And do they think you put your pants on the same way as we do, or do they feel like you're big, high and mighty? Do they appreciate the gravity of your role and the importance of your position?
They think that I'm a silly, embarrassing dad.
Right. So let's open it up to questions. We've got a mic here, and we got a question already.
First, thank you for your service. Shem, you've asked great questions. One of the things you said about entering your position was that you knew you needed to build trust. And that's always about culture and how you run the office. And then at another time you talked about be in touch with us. Let's have a relationship. So I guess my question is this a conversation in your office? And is there a team that goes out about building trust in the justice system? Because in the political world, we're hearing lots of things, right? And trust is very low in that sense. So it seems like if we're going to collaborate, if we're going to get things to work well, we've got to trust each other. So if you could say a little bit about that and your invitation to be in relationship, how do we do that as institutions or even individuals?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question. We try to do it sort of across subsection in the office, and so our violent crime folks interact with young people. We interact through faith communities on safety and on elder abuse. Our white collar and cyber folks engage in community engagement with businesses and our institutions at Georgia Tech and the like. So we hope that, no matter what the issue is, we have a team that's ready to do it. And we know that the trust is lacking. I know when, folks from the office leaked a call that it was lacking. But it hasn't been too long since I was talking to juries and understanding, what furrowed brows sort of popped up at particular points in presenting a case to a jury. We understand that now, and so now you'll see an increase in body-worn cameras. You'll see surveillance. We have had cases in which we didn't have fingerprints, but we'd call a fingerprint expert to explain why we didn't have fingerprints. The same with DNA. And so the basic term, sort of showing your work, in addition to showing up and engaging, I think is our best way to sort of meet you out sort of where you are. We're happy to send folks out to talk about a whole host of things. Opportunities like this to have a conversation with local leaders about the issues that are pressing in the district are very, very helpful. But I know, just from it was beneficial for me having been in the office for 10 years to understand kind of what it was like. What I heard in the hallways and near the water cooler was helpful and instructive. But I get it, cocktail hours, I get it,
Right.
with my family over holidays. There's a lack of trust, and intentional, persistent effort is really the only way we're going to get past it.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Katie?
Ryan, can you speak to the relationship between federal, state, and local government, and how strong is that today, and how does that continue to grow in your efforts?
Thanks, Katie. The Northern District of Georgia is 46 counties, I mentioned. In those 46 counties, there are 374 federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies. And so it is impossible for us to develop big relationships with all of those agencies, but it doesn't mean that we don't try vigorously. And so I've been to as many sort of community engagement things with community folks, but also with our law enforcement partners. We have tremendous cooperation between the federal and state law enforcement agencies here. It's born out of necessity, just because there are just so many, and crime and criminals do not respect jurisdictional boundaries. And so we often find that multiple agencies are working on the same things. And so that necessity has really led to a good collaboration that I've been the benefactor of. Charlie and my predecessors, the Northern District, really worked hard to develop those relationships. And it's my job right now to maintain them. But we can't do our job. We cannot keep the public safe if we don't have strong, functional, nimble relationships with our state and local partners.
Another question.
Thank you for speaking with us today. So a postal worker in Marietta, the paper reported, was just fired for stealing thousands and thousands of checks. And we know this personally because that's our post office, and my accounts receivable employees have been saying for several years that people are stealing checks. In the paper, it said that there was no hint of any prosecution. How do you decide who's going to get prosecuted in cases like this?
So we look for cases, and we make our decisions based on the evidence. Mm-hmm. Is this a case where the evidence is solid in terms of Sham's question about finding the truth? Is it the truth that this person needs to be investigated and prosecuted? And then we look at what's the potential impact. And there are several types of impact that we're looking for. One of the main ones is deterrence. Is prosecuting this person, hopefully publicizing it when it happened, is that going to deter the next person from doing it? And then also at the same time, we're looking to hold people accountable. A postal worker who's stealing checks, they're in a position where those checks are there, a position where the United States government is trusting them to be around mail. And so that sounds like a person who needs to be held accountable for their actions, prevented from being in that position of trust again, and hopefully what happens to that person will deter the next person from doing something similar.
Okay, thank you.
Ryan, let me ask a follow-up question. I know we've got another question coming. Is there a hotline? Is there someone we can call if we have a situation like that, or a cybersecurity problem or something else? Because I think many people may have some skepticism, this is not a criticism, that if you call, you're not going to get to, they're not going to call you, right? And they probably aren't going to call any of your talented folks here. What's the best way to get the message communicated about the problem to see if you could look into it?
The best way is to call the FBI. FBI Atlanta has a number. There's an agent, we call it a duty agent. It's like there's a duty AUSA who fields calls for the day. And so calling the FBI, reporting it, I don't mind. You can call the United States Attorney's Office to follow up. I hear some giggles because absolutely, that is something that can happen, and it does in fact happen. People report crime to us quite frequently, and then we can follow up on it.
Clark, I think you had a question.
Yeah, so I was just curious with the advances in technology. Obviously, everybody's talking about AI and thinking about how bad guys are using AI to do all sorts of bad things. Some of it we were talking about around the table today. Curious, how those advances in technology is impacting things, certainly from that side of it, but also curious how your office might be using that technology to help go after the bad guys and kind of maybe get some different insights in prosecuting not only those crimes, but other ones using AI and ML.
I was talking to Sham over lunch about, last week I was in Washington, and one of the topics discussed among a group of U.S. attorneys was how we'll engage with AI. And you're right, it's two ways. One, to prevent crime that occurs there, and also to harness it and use it as best we can to understand crime. I believe the FBI and Director Wray have spoken about being on the front lines of that technology, and I do expect the government to have some advances there, because we know that anytime there's emerging technology, anytime there's emerging opportunity or new space, we know that criminal activity will creep its way in there, and we know that it's our responsibility to stay just as close as we can to understand that technology and hopefully use it to prevent some things from happening.
So we have time for one more question. I'm going to, actually two more questions, but let me ask Ryan real quickly. Who is your boss, Ryan, and how do you report to him or her?
So that's an interesting question.
Or are we your boss?
Yeah, you are my boss. The U.S. attorneys are nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate, and typically fired only by the president. The reporting structure, I report to the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, Lisa Monaco, and to the Attorney General of the United States, Merrick Garland. And to you, John.
Thank you.
Quick
Randall.
two-part question, and part of it may tie back to prosecutorial discretion, but it seems to be very popular to accuse the DOJ of being weaponized for the opposing party. So I would love to hear your response to people who believe that, part one. And then part two is, as we look forward to November, there seems to be an increasing sense that voter intimidation, voter suppression, election security, obviously super important issues. Mm-hmm. What is your expectation as you look forward to November, and what are you guys doing about it as an office to prepare?
Sure. I'll take the second part first. I mentioned we've charged a couple of cases related to election worker intimidation and threats. That's meaningful for me. My grandmother was an election worker. My dad is a retiree, is an election worker. Knowing that there are folks who volunteer their time to go sit at a rec center and facilitate our ability to vote, and people are threatening them, and it's happening all over the country. It's really unfortunate. And so we've prosecuted a couple of cases quickly. We are trying to put the word out to publicize that so we deter the next person who is at their keyboard and about to take a deep breath and to not do that. And so that's important for us. It dovetails a bit with your first question. We've prosecuted folks for threatening election workers coming out of the most recent election, and we've prosecuted folks for threatening the DA and the sheriff coming out of the Fulton County prosecution of the former president. And so we hope that as we show our work, that people understand that we do it, as the Attorney General says, without fear or favor, and that we're guided by finding the truth. And that doesn't matter who the perpetrator is, and it doesn't matter who the victim is. We've charged another case where an individual made a threatening phone call to Representative Green up in North Georgia. And so doing the work as it comes up, doing the work in a way that people can understand is our best effort, our best way to show that we're not partisan. There's one political appointee in my office, and that's me. Everyone else works there regardless of who the president is or regardless of who the U.S. attorney is. And so we want to try to communicate that, but more importantly, we want our communities to be able to see what we do and understand it, and maybe sort of take away from that these folks are really just seeking the truth.
U.S. Attorney Buchanan, thank you very much. Sham, thank you. Let's give him a hand.
Thank you.